She had 4 hours. 4 hours before Dagny Vale's chosen mate would arrive at the Cavendish family quarters, find them empty, and raise the alarm. 4 hours before the woman who controlled every breath Rue took would realize that her most obedient dyer, the quiet one, the useful one, the one who never caused problems, had finally caused a very large one. Rue Cavendish pressed her back against the canyon wall and tried to breathe. The red rock was warm against her spine despite the early hour, baked by yesterday's sun and still holding that heat the way the quarry held everything, stubbornly, completely. The canyon stretched above her in striated layers of rust and ochre and burnt sienna. The walls so close in this section that the sky was reduced to a pale ribbon overhead. Somewhere ahead, and the passage widened into the shrine clearing. Somewhere behind her, the trail she'd walked since before dawn wound back toward a life she was never going back to. She adjusted the leather satchel on her shoulder. The strap still faintly blue from years of indigo work, the only thing she'd taken from Dagny's compound besides the clothes on her back, and kept moving. The broker had been specific. Sunrise, the cliffside shrine at Voss Canyon. Bring nothing you can't carry. The groom will be waiting. The groom. A stranger. A man she had never met, whose name she didn't know, whose face she wouldn't see until the ceremony was already underway. The broker, a weathered woman named Tace who operated out of a border trading post and asked no questions for the right price, had arranged it all. A proxy marriage under territorial law. Binding, legitimate, and most importantly, fast. Rue hadn't asked who the groom was. She hadn't cared. Anyone was better than the man Dagny had chosen for her, a pack alpha from the northern range whose reputation traveled ahead of him like a cold wind. A man who collected mates the way other men collected land, and discarded them just as casually. Dagny had presented it as an honor, a strategic alliance, a chance for Rue to finally be useful in a way that mattered. Rue had smiled, nodded, and contacted Tace that same evening. The canyon opened. She stopped at the threshold of the shrine clearing and let the breath she'd been holding escape in a long, uneven rush. The shrine itself was carved directly into the cliff face. A shallow alcove cut from the red stone centuries ago, in its entrance framed by 2 natural pillars where the rock had eroded into smooth columns. Morning light poured in from the open top of the canyon, turning the stone walls to liquid amber. Wild sage grew in the cracks. The air smelled like dust and warmth, and something ancient. And standing at the center of the shrine, beneath the carved archway where the old territorial vows had been spoken for generations, was a figure in a deep forest green cloak, hooded, still, waiting. Rue's feet stopped moving before her brain caught up. The figure was tall, significantly taller than her, broad through the shoulders in a way that made the heavy wool of the cloak stretch taut across his back. His hands hung at his sides, and she could see leather bracers at his wrists, the edges worn smooth. He hadn't turned around. She swallowed, forced her voice steady. "I'm the one Tace sent." The hooded figure turned. She couldn't see his face. The hood fell deep, casting everything above his jaw in shadow. But she could see the line of his mouth, the set of his shoulders as he took her in. The way his chin lifted slightly, as though he was recalibrating something. Rue Cavendish. His voice was low, unhurried. It moved through the canyon like it belonged there, warm and steady and grounded in a way that made her think of deep roots and old stone. "You're early. You know my name. Tace gave it to me. She didn't give me yours." A pause. The hooded figure's mouth shifted. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent, something careful. "She said you didn't ask." That was true. Rue lifted her chin. "I didn't need to. I needed a legal marriage before sundown. I don't care if you're a farmer or a fugitive. And if I'm neither, then I still don't care, as long as you can say the vows and sign the record." Another pause, longer this time. The figure studied her from beneath the hood, and Rue felt something she couldn't name, a faint pressure in her chest, like the ground beneath her feet had just become more solid, more certain, as if the red stone of the canyon had shifted subtly, anchoring her in place. She shook it off. Nerves. That's all. The officiant? She asked. He gestured toward the far side of the clearing, where an elderly man sat on a flat stone with a leather-bound register in his lap, apparently dozing in the early warmth. Ready when we are. Rue nodded. She crossed the clearing with deliberate steps, each one carrying her farther from Dagny, from the compound, from 18 years of being told what her hands were for. The satchel bumped against her hip, the sage crunched beneath her boots, and the hooded stranger fell into step beside her, not too close, but close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him, could catch a scent that reminded her of cedar and worn leather and open sky. The officiant woke with a start, blinked at them both, and opened the register. The vows were the old ones, territorial, binding, spoken in the canyon's natural amphitheater where the stone carried every word upward. Rue said hers first. Her voice didn't shake, which surprised her. She'd expected to feel hollow, or frightened, or at least uncertain. Instead, as the words left her mouth, that strange pressure in her chest deepened, steadied, as though something below her was reaching up to meet her, rooting her where she stood. And the groom, the officiant said, looking up from his register with rheumy eyes. The hooded figure stepped forward. He said the vows in that same low, unhurried voice, and Rue watched his hands, scarred, careful hands, as they rested at his sides. He spoke each word with a weight that suggested he meant them. All of them, not just the legal ones. The record, the officiant murmured, holding out the leather book. The stranger signed. Then Rue signed. The officiant stamped the page, blew on the ink, and closed the register with a decisive snap. Bound, he said, by territorial law, witnessed and recorded. And then the stranger reached up and pushed back his hood. The face beneath it was striking. Not in the way she'd braced for, not hard or cruel or calculating. Iron-brown hair fell loose to his collar, slightly tangled from the hood. His jaw was cut clean, shadowed with a day's growth. His cheekbones were sharp but not severe. And his eyes, storm blue, the color of deep water before rain, were looking at her with an expression so steady, so deliberately gentle, that it took her a full 3 heartbeats to place why his face was familiar. She'd seen it before. On coins, on territorial proclamations nailed to market boards, on the banner that flew above every stronghold from the western mountains to the coast, Alaric Dunraven, Alpha King. The ground lurched. Not literally. Her feet were still planted on red stone. The sage was still growing in the cracks. The sun was still pouring into the canyon in long amber shafts. But something inside her shifted so violently that she gasped. And the rooting sensation she'd been feeling throughout the ceremony didn't just deepen, it plunged, straight through the stone floor, through the bedrock, through everything solid and unshakable beneath her, as though her body was trying to anchor itself to the center of the earth. "You," she managed. He didn't flinch, didn't smile, just watched her with those storm-blue eyes, patient and impossibly calm. "Tace owed me a favor," he said quietly. 15 years ago, I gave her safe passage through the Northern Territories when every other alpha turned her away. When she came to me 3 days ago with a request from a woman who needed a husband by sundown, she told me who was forcing the match. And why. You're the Alpha King. I am. And you married me." Her voice climbed. "You married me to... what? To make a political statement? To antagonize Dagny? I married you because Tace told me a woman was being traded to a man she didn't choose, and the woman had enough fire to broker her own way out." His voice stayed level, gentle even. "I married you because I could, and because no one should have to sell themselves to a stranger to escape being sold to a worse one." Rue stared at him. The canyon was silent except for the faint whistle of wind through the high rocks and the sound of her own breathing, too fast, too shallow. And beneath it all, that deep, anchoring pull, that sense of roots, spreading beneath her, holding her upright, turning unstable ground into something she could stand on. "I would have married a farmer," she said, her voice rough. "I know." Something moved across his face. Not amusement, not pity, recognition. "That's why I came." They didn't leave the canyon immediately. Alaric had a camp set up in a wider section of the gorge, half a mile from the shrine, 2 canvas shelters tucked against the canyon wall, a fire ring surrounded by flat stones, and a pair of horses grazing on the tough grass that grew along the dry streambed. He'd come with no guards that she could see, no entourage, no banners. Just the green cloak and the bracers, and a quietness about him that didn't match anything she knew about kings. Rue sat on one of the flat stones by the fire ring and tried to organize her thoughts into something coherent. She had just married the Alpha King. The Alpha King. The man who governed 4 territories, who commanded armies, whose decisions shaped the lives of every pack from the quarry lands to the sea. See, he was currently crouching by the fire, feeding kindling into a small flame with the easy competence of someone who'd done it 1,000 times, and the cream linen of his shirt was unlaced at the collar, and the bronze buckle of his belt caught the morning light, and his hands. She kept coming back to his hands, moved with a patience that contradicted everything she'd ever heard about powerful men. "You're staring," he said without looking up. "I'm recalibrating." That almost smile again. "Take your time." "Why no guards?" "Because Tace told me you were running, and the last thing a woman who's running needs is to arrive at her own wedding and find an army." He sat back on his heels and looked at her. The storm-blue eyes were steady. "I came alone because I wanted you to know this was a choice, not a trap." Rue's throat tightened. She'd been bracing for a trap. Every muscle in her body had been locked and ready for the moment the transaction revealed its cost. The hidden clause, the real reason, the thing he wanted in return. That was how power worked. That was how Dagny worked. Everything came with a price, and the price was always you. "What do you want from this?" she asked, direct, flat, the voice she used when she was too tired to be diplomatic. Alaric didn't look away. "For now, I want you safe. Dagny's chosen match won't touch a woman bound to the crown. Legally, you're beyond her reach. For now. She'll challenge it. I expect her here by midday." Rue's stomach dropped. "She'll track me." "She'll track you," he confirmed. "And when she arrives, she'll find that the woman she considered her property is married to the one person she cannot challenge without bringing her entire pack to ruin." He paused. "That's the political answer." "And the non-political answer?" He held her gaze. The fire crackled between them, and the rooting sensation, the root bond, she was beginning to realize, though the name hadn't come to her yet, pulsed gently beneath her feet, warm and steady as a heartbeat. "The non-political answer is that I've spent 11 years making decisions that affect thousands of people, and I've forgotten what it feels like to do something that's simply right." His voice dropped. "You need it out. I could get you out. It's not more complicated than that." Rue looked at him for a long moment. The sun had moved higher, flooding the canyon with golden light that turned the red stone walls to burnished copper. Dust motes floated in the air between them. His face was open. No performance, no posturing. Just a man sitting by a fire telling the truth because he'd decided she deserved it. "Thank you," she said. The words came out rough and unpracticed, like they'd been stuck in her throat for years. For not making me owe you for this." Something shifted in his expression. His jaw tightened, then softened, and for just a moment she saw the exhaustion beneath the calm, the weight of being the man everyone needed something from, and the surprise of meeting someone who simply said thank you. "You don't owe me anything, Rue." Her name in his mouth sounded different than she expected. Not possessive, not claimed, just spoken, carefully. Feel like he understood that names meant something to someone who'd spent her life being called everything but her own. The morning unfolded in fragments. He showed her the trail that led through the canyon's upper passage, the one that opened onto the high plateau where you could see 3 territories in every direction. The land stretched out in layers of red and gold beneath a sky so wide it made her chest ache. They walked side by side, and she noticed that every time the trail narrowed and his arm brushed hers, that rootedness intensified. The ground felt more solid, the stone more permanent, her own heartbeat more certain. She told him about the dye work, how she'd learned to extract color from everything: walnut husks for brown, iron water for black, madder root for red, and the indigo that stained her satchel straps and the creases of her fingers and wouldn't wash out no matter how hard she scrubbed. How she'd figured out the indigo process herself at 14, staying up 3 nights in a row to get the fermentation right, sleeping on the floor beside the vat because the temperature had to stay constant and no one else cared enough to watch it. "It was the first thing I ever made that was entirely mine," she said, and then stopped, because she hadn't meant to say that part out loud. He didn't fill the silence, didn't nod encouragingly or ask her to continue. He just walked beside her, his boots crunching on the dry stone, and waited. She kept going. How Dagny had noticed her skill early and claimed it for the pack. Selling Rue's dyed fabrics across 3 territories while giving her nothing but a room and a ration and a reminder that she was lucky to have both. How the worst part wasn't the work. She loved the work, loved the chemistry of it, the patience, the way a bolt of rough spun wool could become something extraordinary if you understood what the fibers needed. The worst part was watching her colors leave on traders' carts and knowing that somewhere, someone was wearing a cloak she'd dyed sunset orange, or a scarf she'd turned the exact shade of spring moss, and they had no idea whose hands had made it possible. "I kept one," she said. "One piece. A square of linen I dyed midnight blue years ago. I hid it under my mattress." She touched the strap of her satchel. "Dagny found it. Sold it. Told me I was being sentimental." Alaric's jaw tightened. A small motion, barely visible, but she caught it. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he told her about the quarry. "My father used to bring me here," he said. They were standing at the canyon's edge, looking out over the plateau, and the wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain. He said the canyon was the oldest thing in the territory, that everything built on top of it, the keeps, the borders, the treaties, was just surface. The stone underneath was what held. Rue looked at him. The wind moved his hair across his forehead, and the storm blue of his eyes was almost silver in the high light. "Is that why you chose this place for the ceremony?" "I chose it because it's the only shrine in 4 territories where a marriage can be witnessed and registered without advance notice." The almost smile surfaced. The metaphor was a bonus. She laughed. It surprised her. The sound rough and sudden, escaping before she could catch it. His eyes widened slightly, and something warm and unguarded moved through his expression, as though he hadn't expected that sound from her and was glad to hear it. They stood there for a moment, the wind between them, the canyon below them, and the root bond humming through the stone beneath their feet, like the lowest note of a song she was only beginning to hear. Dagny arrived at midday exactly as he'd predicted. Rue heard her before she saw her. The sharp percussion of hoofbeats echoing off the canyon walls, multiplied by the stone until it sounded like a dozen riders instead of 3. She straightened from where she'd been sitting by the fire, and the breath she'd just taken lodged sideways in her chest. Alaric was already standing. He had shifted position at some point in the last hour, placing himself not in front of her, she noticed, but beside her. Close enough to be a presence, not close enough to be a shield. Dagny Vale rode into the clearing on a gray mare, flanked by 2 enforcers. She was exactly as Rue remembered. Tall, lean, sharp in every sense of the word. The pale ivory fur-trimmed mantle sat on her shoulders like armor, and the gold chain of her office caught the noon sun. Her eyes, flint green, cold as quarry water, found Rue immediately. "There you are," Dagny's voice was measured, precise, the kind of calm that promised consequences. She dismounted smoothly and handed her reins to the nearer enforcer without looking at him. "I've been looking for you since dawn, Rue. You've caused quite an inconvenience." "I've caused a marriage," Rue said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. Dagny's gaze shifted to Alaric, held. And for the first time in Rue's memory, something flickered across the Pack Alpha's face. A crack in the composure, quickly sealed. She'd recognized him. "Alpha King." The words were flat. "I wasn't informed of your interest in my pack's internal arrangements." "Because it wasn't your arrangement to make." Alaric's voice was conversational, almost mild. He didn't move, didn't posture, didn't raise his volume. He simply spoke as though the facts were obvious, and he was mildly surprised she hadn't noticed them sooner. "Rue Cavendish is bound to the crown by territorial law. The ceremony was witnessed and registered this morning." "She is a member of my pack?" "She was a member of your pack. She is now a citizen of the Crown territory, with full legal protections under sovereign law." He tilted his head slightly. "Including protection from forced mating arrangements made without the individual's consent. Which, as I understand it, is how we arrived here." Dagny's jaw tightened. The obsidian ring on her finger glinted as her hand curled at her side. "You don't know the full situation." "I know enough. She's a dyer. She has no standing, no family connection, no... She has a name." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Quiet, heavy, final. Alaric hadn't raised his voice, hadn't stepped forward. But something in the way he said it, the precision, the deliberateness, made the canyon itself seem to hold its breath. Rue felt the root bond surge beneath her feet. Not the gentle hum she'd felt all morning. This was deeper, fiercer, like the bedrock itself was responding to something. The stone floor of the canyon seemed to press upward against her boots, solid and immovable, and she understood with sudden clarity that the ground she was standing on was choosing her back. She stepped forward. "I'm the one you should be speaking to, Dagny." The Pack Alpha's flint green eyes snapped to her. "Watch your tone." "My tone is the least of your concerns." Rue's hands were trembling. She clasped them behind her back and kept talking. "You've spent 18 years telling me I'm lucky, that the roof over my head is generosity, that the work I do, the work that bought your pack half its trade agreements, is a debt I owe you for existing." Her voice cracked. She let it. "I don't owe you my hands. I don't owe you my labor, and I certainly don't owe you my body." Silence. The canyon held it, amplified it, turned it into something vast. Dagny's expression didn't change, but her eyes did. Something behind the flint shifting, recalculating. She was looking at Rue as though seeing her for the first time, and what she saw wasn't the quiet dyer who kept her head down and her hands busy. It was someone standing on stone that wouldn't move. "This isn't over," Dagny said. "Yes," Alaric said quietly. "It is." He didn't elaborate, didn't threaten, didn't list the political consequences or the military implications or any of the things Rue knew he could have said. He simply stood beside her in the red gold light of the canyon and let the silence do the work. Dany looked at them both for a long moment. Then she turned, mounted her horse and rode out of the canyon without another word. The hoofbeats faded slowly, eaten by stone and distance, until the only sound left was the wind through the high rocks and Rue's own breathing. She exhaled. Her knees buckled. Alaric's hand caught her elbow, not gripping, just steadying, warm through the fabric of her sleeve. The root bond flooded through the contact point like water finding a channel, and suddenly the ground wasn't just solid, it was safe. Everything unstable went quiet. Everything uncertain went still. He guided her to the flat stone by the fire ring and sat beside her, keeping his hand on her arm until she nodded that she was steady. Then he let go, and the absence of contact left a faint echo beneath her feet. Not emptiness, but awareness. The bond remembering where it had been. "You're shaking," he said softly. I've never talked to her like that. Rue's voice came out as a whisper. She pressed her palms flat against the warm stone and focused on the texture. Rough, sun-baked, real. 18 years, and I never said, "You said it now." His thumb moved against the inside of her elbow, a small, unconscious circle. That's what matters. She'll come back. She'll find another angle. She might try. His voice was calm, not dismissive, careful. The distinction mattered. But a sovereign marriage can't be dissolved by a Pack Alpha's petition. Not legally, not politically. The Territorial Council would have to vote unanimously, and they won't, because half of them have been waiting for a reason to check Dagny's overreach for years. Rue stared at him. You thought about this. I had 3 days between Tace's message and this morning. I thought about all of it. 3 days. He'd had 3 days to consider whether marrying a stranger was worth the political complication, the personal risk, the simple absurdity of arriving at a canyon shrine at dawn to bind himself to a woman he'd never met. 3 days, and he'd shown up alone, in a green cloak, with nothing but a pair of horses and the patience to let her speak first. She looked up at him. The storm-blue eyes were close, and in them she could see something she hadn't expected. Not pride, not satisfaction, not the triumph of a king who'd won a political chess match. Tenderness. Simple, uncomplicated tenderness, offered without conditions. You let me speak for myself, she said. You didn't step in. It wasn't my fight. It was your fight. She was challenging your marriage. She was challenging you. His voice was gentle. And you didn't need me to answer for you. Something broke open in Rue's chest. Not pain. Not exactly. More like a wall she'd been bracing for so long she'd forgotten it was there, and now that the pressure was gone, the wall didn't know how to stand without it. She kissed him. It wasn't planned. It wasn't graceful. She rose onto her toes and pressed her mouth to his, and for one terrible, suspended second she thought she'd miscalculated, thought she'd confused gratitude for something else. Practical relief for the beginning of something real. Then his hand came up to cradle the side of her face, and the root bond detonated. Every nerve ending she had fired at once. The ground beneath her feet hummed with a resonance so deep she could feel it in her molars, in her ribs, in the chambers of her heart. His mouth was warm and tasted like canyon dust and sage, and something she didn't have a name for yet. Something that felt like the first solid ground she'd stood on in 18 years. His other hand settled at the small of her back, not pulling her closer, just resting there, and the warmth of his palm spread through the wool of her cloak and into her spine. When they separated, his forehead dropped to hers. His breathing was unsteady. His hand was still cradling her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone, and his eyes, storm blue, impossibly close, were looking at her like she was something he hadn't dared to hope for. Rue, he said. Just her name, just the sound of it, spoken like it was the most important word he knew. I married you for the legality, she said, her voice raw. I need you to know that. I know. I didn't expect. I know that too. She closed her eyes. His thumb kept moving against her cheek, slow and certain. The canyon glowed red gold around them, and the root bond settled into something steady and permanent beneath her feet. And for the first time in 18 years, Rue Cavendish stood on ground that didn't feel like it might be taken away. 3 months later. The Quarry Canyon in early summer was a different world. Where winter had left the stone bare and wind scoured, the warmer months had softened everything. Desert wildflowers, yellow and orange and deep violet, grew in clusters along the canyon floor. The sage was thick and fragrant. Even the shrine looked different. Its carved stone columns draped in trailing vines that hadn't been there 3 months ago, as though the canyon itself was getting dressed up. Rue stood at the entrance of the shrine clearing and adjusted the strap of the leather satchel on her shoulder. The same satchel. The same indigo-stained straps. But the woman carrying it was different. And she knew it the way you know the ground has changed beneath you. Not because you can see it, but because you can feel it. 3 months of living in the Crown territory. 3 months of a workshop of her own. A real one, with vats and drying racks and a supply of raw materials she still couldn't quite believe was hers. She'd taken her first commission last month. A set of ceremonial banners for the Territorial Council, dyed in deep indigo and madder red, the colors so rich that the council members had stood in silence when she unfurled them. Alaric had been there. He hadn't said a word, but his hand had found the small of her back, and the root bond had hummed beneath the council chamber floor, and that had been enough. 3 months of waking up in a bed that no one could take from her, in a room with a door that locked from the inside, in a keep where people called her by her name. And 3 months of learning that safety wasn't something you earned, it was something you deserved. And the difference between the two was the distance between the life she'd left and the one she was building. 3 months of Alaric. He was standing in the shrine, same spot where he'd waited for her the first time, beneath the carved archway where the old vows lived in the stone. But there was no hood today, no cloak, just the cream linen shirt and the leather bracers and the storm blue eyes that found hers across the clearing and held. He smiled. Not the almost smile, not the careful one. A real smile, full and unguarded, and it changed his entire face. Softened the sharp edges, warmed the composure, turned the Alpha King into a man who was simply glad to see her. "You're early," he said. "You're always early. I didn't want to miss you." Rue crossed the clearing. The wildflowers brushed her ankles, the sage crunched beneath her boots. And with every step, the root bond pulsed, steady, deep, certain, turning the stone beneath her feet into something that felt less like a place and more like a promise. She stopped in front of him, reached up and straightened the collar of his shirt, which didn't need straightening, just because she wanted to touch him. "I want to say the vows again," she said. His eyebrows rose. "We're already married." "I know, but the first time, I said them to a stranger in a hood." She held his gaze. "I want to say them to you." Something moved across his face, fierce and tender and barely contained, in the same expression she'd learned to read over 3 months of quiet mornings and shared meals, and the slow, patient work of learning to trust someone who had never once asked her to earn it. "Then say them," he said softly. She did. Every word. The same old territorial vows, spoken in the same canyon, beneath the same carved archway. But this time her voice didn't just hold steady. It held everything. She watched his face as she spoke, and she saw the moment each vow landed. The slight catch of his breath on the second line. The way his eyes went bright and fierce on the third. The softening of his mouth on the final word that turned the Alpha King into something simpler and more important. A man who had been chosen. Not for his title, not for his power, not for the political convenience of his crown. For him. The officiant wasn't there. No register, no stamp, no legal requirement. Just Rue and Alaric, and the red stone walls and the desert wildflowers and the root bond singing through the bedrock beneath them, deep and permanent and unshakable as the canyon itself. When she finished, he kissed her. Softly, deliberately, with both hands cradling her face the way he'd done the first time, as though she was something worth being careful with. "I would have married a farmer," she said against his mouth. The words that had started as a warning 3 months ago, now carrying an entirely different weight. He pulled back just enough to look at her. Storm blue eyes, warm and steady and impossibly full. "I know," he said. "That's why I stayed." The canyon held them, the stone held them, and the ground beneath Rue Cavendish's feet, solid, chosen, permanent, held her the way it had been waiting to hold her all along, like she'd always belonged there, like she was finally, irreversibly, home.